This is Theory of Change. I'm Matthew Sheffield. Thanks for joining me for another episode. Before we get to today's program, I just wanted to mention that Theory of Change is part of the Flux Media Network, so go to flux.community for more podcasts and articles about politics, media, religion, and technology, and how they all intersect and affect each other. And if you want to go directly to the archives of this program, just go to theoryofchange.show. And you can get the video, audio, and transcript of all the episodes. And if you are a paid subscribing member, thank you very much for your support. That means a lot, and you have unlimited access to the archives. So thank you very much for those who are supporting that way. And if you can leave a review on iTunes or somewhere, that is really helpful. If you're watching on YouTube, please do click the like and subscribe buttons to get notified when there's a new episode. All right, so with that out of the way, let's get into today's program. It's just over 3 months before Election Day, and President Joe Biden is trailing disgraced ex-President Donald Trump in most public opinion surveys. One of the biggest reasons for that is that Biden seems to be getting much less than the 85% support from Black Americans that Democrats typically get in elections. Just how much less support that Biden is getting is difficult to say, however, because most polls don't have enough African American respondents to draw meaningful conclusions, but there have been some that have. In a survey conducted last month by Suffolk University in the swing states of Michigan and Pennsylvania, only 56% of Black registered voters said they would vote for Biden if the election were held at that day. There's also a generational divide to the discontent as well. In April, the Pew Research Center found that 84% of Black registered voters ages 50 and up said that they would vote for Biden, but only 68% who were 49 and younger said the same. In a May national survey conducted by the University of Chicago, 23% of Black adults between 18 and 40 said they would vote for Trump. 33% picked Biden, while 25% said they'd vote for, quote, someone else, whoever that is. Undoubtedly, much of the problem that Biden seems to be facing stems from his advanced age and the way that he's demonstrated that in recent weeks and months. He is the oldest person ever to hold the office of president, and Americans of all races and parties have expressed concerns about his age for many years. But almost certainly there are some other factors in the mix as well. Republicans ignored Black voters for many decades and wrote them off, but Donald Trump recently has been greatly expanding his efforts to attract them, most prominently by trying to feature and put forward anyone in entertainment or sports who likes him. And there are more than a handful who have stepped forward to help him out. There's also the question of whether Trump's macho personality and sexist treatment of women might be making him appealing to men who have been marinating in pop culture products that frequently degrade and insult women. This is a trend that has existed across racial groups. We'll see how things shake out in November, whether Trump's able to get a higher percentage of the Black vote than previous candidates on the Republican side, or he can still succeed from his standpoint by getting enough African Americans to simply stay home and not support the Democrats. It's a win-win scenario either way if he can do it. But in the meantime, I wanted to bring in my friend Jamilah Lemieux to discuss all this. She is a podcaster at Slate and a writer who has published extensively on Black culture and politics. And joining me now is Jamilah Lemieux. Welcome to Theory of Change, Jamilah.
Thank you.
There's been so much happening in the political world lately. One of the things, besides all the smaller term things like, Trump naming his vice presidential nominee and getting shot in the ear, et cetera, is Joe Biden's numbers among Black Americans are lower at this point in time than past Democratic presidential candidates. Do you think that Trump's going to improve his numbers significantly from 2020 among Black people?
I don't know if Trump is going to improve his numbers with Black people significantly, but I do expect that they'll improve this time around. The GOP has been making a big push for Black men since the last election. Once the DNC really started embracing Black women, talking about listen to Black women, trust Black women are this important voter bloc, I think the RNC saw an opportunity to speak to Black men. And I think there were Black men who were turned off by the Democrats focusing on Black women specifically, even though we are worthy of that attention and have earned that attention as such a tremendously loyal voting bloc. Black men are not far behind us, but they are behind us. But I've seen, a lot of right-wing propaganda making its way around online hip hop spaces and, being promoted by Black male influencers. I see them, spreading pro-Trump ideology on Twitter. And, I don't doubt that some of these guys are getting checks. They're being paid by, by PACs, by whomever to promote Republican ideas to Black audiences, particularly, Black audiences that aren't super educated.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And like another way that they're making some of this marketing approach also, I think, is using religion and, using that as a tool, because a lot of Black Americans are the most religious and most Christian demographic, with lots of fundamentalist viewpoints, right? That's got to be effective for some people.
Yes, but interestingly enough, Black women are far more religious than Black men. But Black women have historically been able to vote, their interests as opposed to just voting with their Bibles. So I am curious to see how many religious Black men are converted by these attempts to, court them.
Yeah, and of course, it's something that they've done for a little while, prominently with Ben Carson and his idiocy. Man, yeah, because he's been riding that gravy train for decades of, trying to be the pious guy that needs your money. And then, of course, the Republicans are also making a lot of outreach using entertainers who are Black.
Excuse me.
Using entertainers who are Black, particularly rappers. And there's, nobody who's really currently that big in hip hop is out there, shilling for Trump. But still, some of the past ones are. You want to for people who don't know, like, for instance, Trump did an appearance in New Jersey a little while ago with some rappers that it didn't get as much attention as it should have, I think, because it was really revealing. I thought.
I think it's because the rappers were just not that well known. I think if people knew who these guys were, there'd be more attention. I don't remember their names. Like, I don't even know I didn't know who those guys were prior to that event.
They're guys who are, basically live in the New York area. And one guy calls himself Chef G. He apparently has millions of YouTube views and Spotify streams, but he also is the central figure in a gang case that the Brooklyn district attorney started prosecuting, and he has been, sentenced for weapons possessions. And then the other rapper who was there with Trump is this other guy who goes by Sleepy Hollow. He's got lots of Spotify fans, and he's also in the gang case as well. And Trump was out there. He had him on stage and, introduced them to everybody. And, it's very bizarre seeing Republicans trying to have it both ways. Don't you think?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, you're looking something up.
Yeah, I was just thinking about Trump pardoning Kodak Black and Lil Wayne. And why that might be part of the reason that these rappers are willing to be around him. There have been rappers in Trump's orbit for a very long time. I mean, once upon a time, Trump might have popped up in a rap video. Like, a lot of rappers were impressed by his wealth, by his alleged business acumen, and his lifestyle, right? So, like, Trump was name dropped in a whole lot of rap records. I think of songs by Wu-Tang that mention him. But like, more recently, I think of Lil Wayne and Kodak Black, who received presidential pardons on President Trump's last day in office, both related to gun charges. And, you know, I suspect that some of the rappers who are willing to be in his orbit now are looking for, you know, something similar to happen for them, or perhaps for some of their friends.
Yeah. I mean, you have to think so. And I mean, that is apparently how Kanye West got to know Trump initially when he was the president. That he, you know, when he was married to Kim Kardashian, that she was involved in trying to get some pardons for various people, and so she reached out to the Trump White House, and he tagged along, and you know, that was when Kanye decided he loved Trump and loved Republicans. You know, not too many years after saying George Bush doesn't care about black people.
Mm-hmm.
But even like he's another example of the religious fundamentalism stuff. Like, right, that guy's religious viewpoints are completely nuts. He, you know, thinks he's a prophet. He talks to Jesus daily. You know, got a continuous stream of conversation with God on in his brain. Yeah, like, but I mean, and then Trump's also been making some other overtures, not just with black men, but also with Amber Rose, who you have interviewed in the past. You want to talk about her for people who don't know who she is? Maybe give us a little intro first to her.
Yeah, Amber Rose is a model and socialite and influencer who came to notoriety because she was once Kanye West's girlfriend. And she made a name for herself outside of that. She briefly got involved with some pro-women's activism, championing against slut shaming, you know, being outspoken about abortion rights and reproductive justice. But I think that, and Amber, who identifies as mixed race and could be considered white passing, I don't think that appealing to her was an attempt to get black women. I think getting Amber Rose was about getting black men. I think it was about her being an object of desirability for black men, and the GOP thinking that black men are so dull-witted, you know, that a pretty woman can charm them into changing their vote or casting a vote when they wouldn't have cast one in the first place.
Mm-hmm. And so she gave a speech at the Republican National Convention last night, and here's a little piece from it where she's getting cheered on from the stage.
I realize Donald Trump and his supporters don't care if you're black, white, gay, or straight. It's all love. And that's when it hit me. These are my people. This is where I belong.
And there it is. So, yeah, and she, you know, did typical kind of black Republican tropes in her speech a lot. But I mean, what was your reaction when you heard that she was speaking there, besides the fact that you think they're trying to get black men? Like, I mean, you had talked to her before, like you have spoken to her.
Years ago.
Yeah.
I think Amber is a grifter. You know, this makes me call into question everything I believe that she stood for in the past with regard to women's rights. I think she's found a hustle. You know, I think that was a hustle for her in the past, and now she's on to a new hustle that pays a little bit better. I don't think Amber Rose would have ever stood on a stage the size of the Republican National Convention had she not been there. You know, she would never have a platform like this if she wasn't doing, you know, what she's doing by attaching herself to MAGA. You know, she's an attention seeker. She's been good at keeping herself in the public eye for all these years without having like a discernible talent. You know, like she doesn't do that much modeling at this point. You know, like it's not like you see her on a runway or in a print magazine anywhere. She's kind of famous for being famous, sort of like the Kardashians, you know, but she doesn't have Skims or a Kylie Beauty. You know what I mean? So what was she going to sell? She's selling herself.
Yeah, and she tried to be a rapper, but it was so completely a non-event that I think a lot of people don't even remember that it happened. And I never listened to it, and I don't know anybody who has, except maybe for journalistic purposes. So yeah, like, and that's, you know, buttressing your point that you know, people didn't like what she was doing necessarily because she wasn't really doing anything, and she wasn't, you know, getting model contracts for whatever reason, and so the Republicans will always welcome a person who is going to sell out to them. Seems like, right? Okay, yeah, but at the same time, though, you know, it seems so completely insincere. I mean, Matt Walsh, that extremist Christian commentator over at the Daily Wire, he goes angry that she was allowed to speak there. He says on Twitter, he made a tweet that said, "The RNC gives a primetime speaking slot to a pro-abortion feminist and self-proclaimed slut with a face tattoo whose only claim to fame is having sex with rappers. Truly an embarrassment. Not a single voter will be mobilized by this person." Is he right on that last point?
I think he is. I think he is.
Yeah. Well, okay. So, you know, and it's still up in the air as we're recording, but there are some rumors that 50 Cent, he may make an appearance at the convention as well on Monday when Trump came out to bask in the applause. He came out to one of 50's songs, one of his more famous ones. And, you know, like, I mean, but he's always been kind of a Republican over the years, right?
Yeah, 50 is very conservative and would fit right in with the Republican Party.
Well, and I mean, and, you know, like, as you were to go back to what you were saying about, you know, Trump, he was name checked quite a bit, especially in the mid 2010s by a lot of rappers, and maybe, you know, and obviously that's probably in conjunction with The Apprentice. I'm sure that's related to it as well. But this is something that you have been writing about recently, this idea of, you know, just the inherent sexism in so much of rap music, and like there's some, you know, affinity with Trump and his macho and you know, I mean, well, he's an adjudicated rapist, we can say that, you know, and the way that he treats women and abuses them. I mean, that's probably another point of affinity, but
yeah, I think that misogyny is really what connects Black men and white men through hip hop. You know, like I think that white men who didn't grow up in the inner city around gangs, you know, around street violence, can't necessarily relate to that part of the music, but they can relate to hating women, right? They can relate to thinking of women as bitches and hoes. Same as, you know, middle-class Black guys who didn't grow up around street violence or who are, you know, somewhat insulated from that, connect with hip hop because of the misogyny, because of the way it speaks about women and to women. And I think that Trump's treatment of women appeals to, you know, a lot of men, Black, white, and otherwise, who feel disenfranchised by feminism, who blame the gains that women have made in society for their own shortcomings. who would like to see us get, quote unquote, back to a time where women knew their place. And, his sexism is certainly a selling point.
Yeah. And, and to your point, like the transracial appeal with the misogyny and sexism, I mean, like that was the original shtick of Eminem, the biggest, well, at least I guess for a while, the biggest white rapper. He was a guy who didn't have any of those impoverished experiences, so he couldn't really talk about that. But the thing he did talk about was how he was going to kill and murder various women in his life, especially his mom. And I mean, I remember when I was a Republican when he came out, and I was like, holy shit, I cannot believe people are listening to this stuff. It's awful. But yeah, like I think that, that type of stuff, it did implant in a lot of men's minds, unfortunately, that it made them, it groomed them for somebody like Trump to come along in the political world, I think.
I think what's interesting about Eminem is that he, at one point, was one of the few rappers who had the courage to call Trump out. And he just released a new album last week, and I haven't heard anything about anti-Trump lyrics. I've heard awful things he said about women, including women who've been victims of domestic violence, but nothing about him coming after Trump, which I find to be very interesting, particularly in this moment in history. What happened to that courage? What happened to that part of him that felt that was something he needed to speak out against? He's just doubling down on the same old misogyny and violence towards women he's, stood for his whole career, basically.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, and it's like, and you wrote a piece recently for Vanity Fair where you talked about your perspective on all this stuff and on hip hop as a female fan, and how they don't really care about it. But there was kind of a little bit of an exception, sort of, recently with Kendrick Lamar. You want to kind of unwrap that for people who weren't following that?
Yeah. Kendrick Lamar and Drake have been embroiled in a, very public rap beef. After years of taking shots at each other, it, exploded down into about 6 diss tracks between the two of them. And on Kendrick's end, he's accused Drake of being a misogynist. He called him a misogynist. He said, I don't think you like women. He's accused him of not liking Black women specifically. And he's accused him of having inappropriate relationships with women and with girls, with underage girls, So in response, Drake has claimed that Kendrick abuses his wife. So it's really kind of fascinating. And women have often been at the center of hip hop beefs, like Jay-Z and Nas. Their beef begins because Jay-Z has a relationship with the mother of Nas's child. But like this time around, we're seeing women and girls be defended. That's something that mainstream hip hop music, by men has not done. Right? There's one single record, Tupac's Keep Your Head Up, which is, dedicated to Black women and talks about how they're mistreated within the community. But other than that, rap is never telling you to treat women better or saying that there's anything wrong with treating women poorly. So it's been interesting to hear these two guys say, essentially, it's not cool to take advantage of underage girls. It's not cool to, abuse your wife. It's not cool to, hate women. But, women are just fodder for this beef between them, right? Because if Drake and Kendrick didn't, have an issue with each other, Kendrick would have known about Drake being into underage girls and he never would have said anything about it, right? You just kept it to himself if he thought he was a cool guy.
Yeah, well, and and you wrote about your own kind of perspective on that as a Black woman fan of hip hop, and I mean, like, that's how much of a discussion have you had about that just continual disrespect that women
have been receiving in the genre with other women? Like how does that feel for you guys?
I mean, it's a conversation I've been having since I was, 11 or 12 years old. The first article I ever had published when I was 16 was called Misogyny in Hip Hop, and it talked about Eminem, who is still then a relatively new artist. And it talked about the ways that other men in hip hop have historically spoken about women. It's incredibly hurtful. It's one of the most popular genres of music on the planet. And in the article, I attempted to list every accusation of violence against women against the rapper that I could find. There were a lot of them that I remembered and knew. There are a lot of them that I discovered during my research. And there were a few that I remembered after the article was published, like, oh, I forgot about this. Oh, I forgot about that, because there's so many of them, right? And so I think it's important to recognize that the violence against women that can be heard in hip hop records doesn't just stay on wax. It's not just for entertainment. It's reflected in how these men treat women in, their day-to-day lives, right? Like, we're getting all these stories about Puffy since, the spate of lawsuits against him late last year, including 6 rape allegations, instances of him putting his hands on women. There's the video that circulated of him beating his former girlfriend, Cassie, and stomping her out. Hip hop has the violence against women problem, and that's not to say that other genres of music don't have artists that are violent towards women, but they're not generally singing about it, right? And so, like, it's not as central to the culture as violence against women is central to hip hop culture.
Mm-hmm. Well, and like you wrote about, having to kind of switch off part of your brain to listen to the song. I mean, that's an awful thing to have to do. I mean, the whole point of music is to experience it with all of yourself, like if you really want to get into it, right? But you can't do that. We've had this, I raised this point with you in a text, but like, there's maybe some possibility, do you think, that the fact that there have been a lot more female performers coming out and really topping the charts lately, that maybe it has woken people up to some degree to be like, oh, well, maybe we can not be anti-female all the time and stand up for women being mistreated once in a while. I don't know. I mean, what did you think?
I don't know. I haven't seen the rise of women rappers have that sort of impact on hip hop yet. I haven't seen it challenge male rappers to speak differently about women or think differently about them. They're making the same music they've been making for the past 30 years. Women are objects to be used and discarded. I'd like to think that as women rappers continue to dominate,
because they absolutely have. Like, I mean, they are just kicking the men's asses. By and large.
Some of them are, but I think there's still a long way to go. I think what really has to happen, and I've been waiting for this my whole life, and I'm hoping that maybe Gen Z can take this up, because my generation wasn't able to do it, and Gen X certainly didn't do it. But I think it's going to take some pushback from the listeners. I think the women who are, 50% of the hip hop buying audience, if not more, are going to have to say, we're no longer listening to records that dehumanize us. We're not interested in records that make light of violence against us. And we're not interested in rappers who, participate in actual acts of violence against women. Right. So in the past couple of years, there was the case of Tory Lanez and Megan Thee Stallion. Tory Lanez is a rapper and singer from Toronto who shot Megan Thee Stallion, who's a superstar rapper, in the foot in 2020. And his star rose after this. He had more fans. There are people that are, dedicated to conspiracy theories that he didn't actually shoot her, that she lied, that this is some
it was
sort
all
of
fake. Yeah.
This is all fake, you know. And so like that to me says a lot about where we, you know, very much still are, and that we have a really long way to go as it, you know, relates to making hip hop a safer space for women, you know, because Megan is beautiful, rich, famous, talented, right? And still was able to fall victim to the sort of campaign of harassment that accompanied being shot by a man. You know, that says a lot about the listening audience.
Yeah, no, it does, and not good things, unfortunately. But yeah, I mean, like, but just kind of going back maybe to the bigger picture. You know, on my podcast, I have talked with historians and political theorists and whatnot, and you know, like the emerging consensus among a lot of people is that that you know, in the past, the you know, American reactionaries who control the Republican Party, you know, they were more religiously organized and racially organized, you know, in their earlier years. But now that as the percentage of people who are, you know, Hispanic or Asian or Black is a lot higher among younger generations, and they're also not religious. They're having to use sexism as kind of their sort of glue to hold the coalition together in a lot of ways. And you know, and I think Trump is the perfect embodiment of that, I think, in so many ways. But I mean, what do you think about? Do you think J.D. Vance is relevant in that context as well? What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, he's notoriously sexist. He opposes abortion, even in the case of rape and incest. You know, there was a very deliberate decision made with that selection of a VP. You know, this was not something that was done to court women who might be on the fence about Trump. This was a call to men.
Yeah, I think so. And yeah, and like, you know, then all these laws that have been passed subsequently, you know, regarding abortion, and you know, have made clear that these are not pro-life laws. These are laws about controlling women and about controlling girls, and you know, and like that's what the actual point is, more than anything else. Oh, I said it too good, huh?
Yeah.
Okay, well, yeah, okay. So, but you know, at the same time, though, you know, while all these movements are going on toward, you know, the Republican Party and among, at least, you know, and we'll see how it ends up being, but there is a paradox that, you know, there are a lot of Black celebrities out there who do not like Trump. And are, you know, would love to speak out against him, but they need somebody to, you know, help them because they're not super political, you know, they're not writers or whatever, you know, so like they need help having the right words to say about it, because not everybody's a political junkie out there because they're busy and they got stuff going on. And not everybody can be Taraji Henson, you know, calling out Project 2025 at the BET Awards. But you know, the Biden campaign has been really lackluster in this regard, I feel like. What do you think?
I do think the Biden campaign has failed to effectively engage Black influencers of all sorts, meaning people who are strictly online influencers, celebrities, athletes, entertainers. But I will say this, something my mom points out often is that, like, it's not that celebrities don't play a part in political life in this country, because they do. Like, we've obviously elected 2 celebrity presidents at this point. We've elected celebrities as governors, both Republican. But when it comes to Black people in particular, celebrities are often looked at to be spokespeople for the race in a way that I think is somewhat unfair. You know, like they don't necessarily have the credentials of a Mark Lamont Hill, right, or Joy Ann Reid, but they're given these platforms because they're famous. But, you know, I do think that the Biden campaign, should have made some inroads with some of those folks. I mean, I think the Biden campaign should have tried to build a relationship with Taylor Swift, and I don't know if they attempted that and were just shut down, but it just seems that there are a lot of spaces in which people could be surrogates for the party and they're just not being invited, to participate in any meaningful way.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's something, for people who are extremely pro Biden and, they want him to stay on the ticket come hell or high water. I think that they don't understand quite that when people are talking about replacing him, it's not just about, whatever perception what people might have of Biden himself and how he conducts himself, but it's also the people that he hires and just the antiquated style of doing things. Like they think that showing up and doing unveiling I don't know, some manufacturing plant or whatever like that's a campaign event, and they've checked the box and they don't have to do anything. And then meanwhile, Trump's going on all the a zillion podcasts and hanging out with Amber Rose and whatever, those are the sorts of things that, or going to WWE events or UFC. Like Biden doesn't do any equivalent of that. He's nowhere to be seen in any of these adjacent events. And the reality is that, that when you look at the polls, that the people who are the least engaged and the least informed, they're going for Trump because the Biden people have nothing to say to him. And that's a real problem, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a longtime failure of the Democratic Party post-Obama to reach voters where they are. I think about the spaces that Hillary Clinton wasn't in, that she should have been in. I think about how Kamala Harris could be used as a surrogate in ways that she just simply is not. And when she does, she shows up and shows out, right? But we're not, I think she should have been at the BET Awards.
That's a good point. Yeah. And speaking of her, though, I think that the way that they've used her, or rather not used her, has just been ridiculous. I mean, you can say maybe she's not the most charismatic person in the world, but who is necessarily, right? She's good enough. And they're not putting her out there in a lot of places. And then at the same time, people will turn around and be like, oh, well, people don't like her. And it's like, well, they never actually heard her say anything. Do you think that's my thought on her?
It's really interesting. The Obama elections were such a case study in branding, like how a well-branded product can basically sell itself. They were pioneers in social media marketing when it came to Obama, just the graphics and the image. And we were, given this look at Barack as somebody very cool, and I would imagine that Obama probably hasn't been the coolest dude in the room his whole life. I think that's something that came to him a little bit later in his story, but we, meet him as this very cool, debonair, down-to-earth guy who can talk to basketball players, who can talk to families. I think about how his wife was rebranded. The makeover that she got once she got into the White House. She started wearing the high-end and low-end dresses, like one day she's in Proenza and the next day she's wearing like a $150 dress from White House Black Market and everybody's talking about it. And Kamala, I think, needed that too. And I understand that she's an elected official and is to be taken with a level of seriousness, that perhaps the first lady is not. But I think that we needed a repackaged Kamala, one who was a little bit more relatable, one who was cool, charmer and cooler. More charming and cooler. And I hate to say that because when we're talking about, the fate of the world, essentially, or the nation, we shouldn't be talking about charisma.
Yeah.
But we do know that
cool.
and who's cool. But we know that that does, impact how people vote in elections. I mean, Trump, for his supporters, is cool. He's somebody that they'd want to have a drink with. He's somebody, who they aspire to be like. And the Democrats haven't sold us somebody aspirational in a long time.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. Yeah, like, I mean, they admire Trump for having sex with Stormy Daniels. I think a lot of them, even though he continues to lie about it. But yeah, like they think that's an admirable thing that he did. And they love that, he's had all kinds of affairs and whatnot. And apparently some of the women feel that way about him as well. Like there's there's some of these notorious pictures of Trump supporting women at his rallies, having signs that say he can grab my pussy, things like that. You've seen those, right?
Yeah.
And so like but Democrats, I don't think they learned anything from Obama 2008. I really don't think they did, or not very much. And it's a real shame because, I think in a lot of ways they haven't understood that the Democratic electorate, to your point about, inspiring and whatnot, like the Democratic electorate is fundamentally different than the Republican electorate. The Republican electorate is motivated by negative things. Like, they think that the world is ending. They think that everybody's going to be gay any minute now. They think that they're not, and then the next day everybody's going to be trans, and everyone hates America and is smoking weed. Like that's what they think. They really believe this stuff. And, everybody's going to be an atheist, Black Lives Matter, Antifa activist by the end of it. And they're going to burn down their house. Like that's what the Republican electorate thinks about America. They hate America. They hate their fellow Americans. But the Democratic electorate, the people who vote Democratic, they want something better. They want to have a better life for themselves and their family and their community. And they want to see it. And they want somebody to talk about, how they're going to get there and what they're going to do for them and how they can help. And that to me was what Obama 2008 was. But yeah, ever since then, and even like he didn't really do that even as much in 2012. Like it was an anomaly in Democratic politics, and certainly that's not what the message was in 2016 or 2020, and doesn't appear to be that now. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, the Obama 2008 campaign was inspiring. It made you believe that a better world was possible, and the Democrats have not sold us that since then. Like the last two elections have basically been about like, Trump is so awful, we must defeat Trump at all costs, but it doesn't seem like the Democratic Party is willing to pay the cost necessary to actively defeat Trump. Like I think about Joe Biden suspending his campaign ads the day after Trump was shot. Like when that could have been an opportunity to, perhaps post a message trying to unify the nation, right? Condemning what happened, but also talking about the fact that, this is somebody who stoked political violence himself. This is somebody who, inspired his followers to launch an insurrection. I mean,
or he could just run positive ads, just being like, hey, I'm Joe Biden. I got these 5 things I want to do. That's it.
Yeah. I mean, there was no reason to go silent, like to give this man a moment of silence as if he died. I just think was just really short-sighted and, just another reminder of how the Republicans, they commit to a bit. Like if Joe Biden had been shot at, Trump would have had a commercial the next day about how Joe Biden had the worst assassination attempt of any president.
Yeah. Well, or like his son, Don Jr., he promoted a meme after Paul Pelosi, Nancy Pelosi's husband, got attacked. He was like, he reposted a picture of somebody had posted some white
men's underwear and hamburger. And he was like, "Oh, I got my Paul Pelosi costume ready now." And
Yeah.
Junior thought that was hilarious. Like they mocked the assault on her husband, and
Openly.
you know, and the mainstream media did not. They did not call that out, and like, but at the same time, I feel like that a lot of Democrats in the leadership class or the donor class, they think that the mainstream media, that they can somehow bully the mainstream media into becoming a Democratic or progressive media. And that's not going to happen. And they've been trying this for 30 years or more. And it's not going to work. They should just make their own stuff. Like, I mean, the right-wing media now at this point, I'm going to actually tally up the numbers, but like, if you add up all the various, podcasts and video websites and whatnot, like the right-wing advocacy media is probably 2 or 3 times larger, maybe even more than everybody in left-wing media put together.
Absolutely.
And, and especially in terms of like podcasts that target younger, like younger people, like Gen Alpha and Gen Z, like, the right-wing oligarchs, they're funding things, talking that are ostensibly about dating, quote unquote. But really what they are is just, telling young boys that, Andrew Tate, great example, telling young boys that, women need to be put in their place. They shouldn't have rights, and they exist to serve men. And if they don't hear any other message on YouTube about that, what do you expect them to believe?
Yeah, the Democrats suck at propaganda. Like they're, like the right wing has been piling their followers on with so much propaganda, so much information, so much that's designed to compel them to vote for somebody like Donald Trump. And the left just seems unwilling or unable to do that. Just the lack of strong left-leaning publications at this point, that are willing
why
to
do you
call
think it is,
themselves
though?
left-leaning. There's something inherently cowardly about the Democratic Party, and I've struggled to understand just why that is for many years. But, they're just afraid to say things with their chests, like they seem to believe that by being civil towards the enemy and not treating them as the enemy, that somehow things will just work out. We got to play nice. We got to play fair. We got to play above board. But these people aren't playing nice or fair at all,
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it's also like, I think that they think that people will just figure it out themselves. And, because like it is the case that the more educated you are, like people who have, like the more educated you are, the less likely you are to like Donald Trump in general. But the problem is, I think Democrats, they forgot that most Americans never graduated from college ever. Like that was never the majority of Americans. And, and in the process, they, like this is how they lost the white vote for themselves in some ways. That, like Bill Clinton, I think he either got pretty close, like he got pretty close to the percentage that Bush got in 1992. But the non-college educated white vote has gradually, slipped to be, pretty overwhelmingly majority Republican, even though that wasn't how it started out. And we're seeing similar trends happening with non-educated, non-college Hispanics. And we're seeing some of that with, although interestingly enough, not with Black Americans. The Black Americans who are gravitating toward the Republican Party is the college educated ones. What do you think is going on with that anomaly? Is this just a proximity to whiteness, or what do you think?
I think it's the proximity to whiteness. I think it's the result of a lot of effort by the GOP to compel these voters. And these are largely Black male voters, not Black women.
Yeah, I guess I don't think that the Pew Research did a breakdown on education and sex. So I think that might be right. Yeah, and I mean, but it's a challenge though, because like I think that to a large degree, Democrats they fantasize about the perfect message, like singular message, and they don't realize you have to have a lot of messages and you have to have a lot of channels to reach people. Like the Biden campaign has been very big on TV ad spending, but a lot of people don't watch TV, and a lot of people can skip the commercials. And if you can reach people many other ways, and you should. But yeah, it's like their operative class. I mean, like Biden's consultants, his top advisors are almost as old as he is, and so they kind of lost touch in a lot of ways, I feel like.
Yeah, I definitely think Biden's advisors are very out of touch.
Mm-hmm. Well, okay, so now just to go back to Kamala Harris, there is some talk. I guess some of that's muted now, given the Trump shooting situation. But maybe it's going to come back. We'll see. But about getting Biden to resign either as the president or resign his candidacy in favor of Kamala Harris, and having her take the top of the ticket. Not just because she can, significantly in part because people know who she is, who's already been vetted, and also that legally speaking, she can use all that money that people donated to Biden Harris for president. So, I mean, what have you been thinking about that? Do you think people would go for that? Because she looks like poll better than Biden does in polls, that like between like 2 or 3, 4, sometimes better than him.
Kamala polls better than Biden, but I honestly don't believe that the necessary amount of people to defeat Donald Trump would be willing to vote for a Black woman. I find that completely unfathomable. Maybe folks could surprise me. Maybe a lot of, people who don't generally vote would come out who would be inspired by that. But I just think that this nation hates Black women so much so that the idea of putting a Black woman at the top of a ticket just seems like a terrible risk to me, considering the stakes. But I also, there's a matter of the timing. I mean, it's July. The election's in November. The calls for Biden to step down should have started, 6 months ago, a year ago, right? Like the idea that at this point, everybody would just pivot and embrace Kamala and she would, have to stop what she's doing and become a presidential candidate. I just think that's really unrealistic. And I think what's also worth noting is that like a lot of the calls for Biden to step down said nothing about who should step up, right? So there are plenty of people saying it shouldn't be him and floating other names, which I think says a lot about what this nation thinks of Black women, because obviously, really there would be one option if he were to step down. It would be her. But a lot of people, wanted to talk about this governor or this, other Democrat.
I think also that Kamala Harris is getting, in addition to some of the racial, questions, she's getting a lot of the very same critiques that were lodged against Hillary Clinton. She has a cackle, or she's not personable enough. She doesn't smile more, and things like that. But I mean, on the other hand, did you think that Barack Obama was going to win in 2008?
No, I did not trust. No, I was shocked. I campaigned for him. I was at a watch party. Mm-hmm. I was very excited about his candidacy, but no, I didn't trust white people to do the right thing. I never do. And usually that lack of trust has served me well, but that one singular time I was wrong. And look at what the country has been doing ever since then.
Yeah. Well,
That's a fair point.
Well, I mean, at the same time, I guess there also is an additional little controversy that, to some degree, the pro Biden people are, trying to sort of wrap themselves in black women
To say that black women, you should do what black women say and keep him on the ticket, which seems a little bit patronizing. Maybe that if that's the right word, but especially when the most likely person to take his place is also a black woman, and I'm sure that black women would like to vote for her if she were to do that. I don't know. It just seems a little weird to me and kind of tin-eared. Have you looked at that at all? That messaging? Have you seen that?
What messaging specifically? Because you said a few things.
The idea that I've seen memes of people
Black
pushing out there. Listen to black women and keep Biden on the ticket
At the top. I mean, it's a little absurd saying that about an old white guy. I think.
Yeah, but I mean, I do think it speaks to what the base of the party desires, which is to have Joe Biden on the ticket, and black women represent the base of the party. It depends which black women you're talking to. I think these are largely older black women, baby boomers, maybe just some Gen Xers who feel passionate about keeping Biden on the ticket. But I also think that black women are not willing to, may feel the same way as I do, that putting a black woman against Donald Trump just feels like so much of a risk, I mean, Joe Biden was identified because he was supposed to be the guy that could beat Trump. And he was the first time around. He was a certain kind of old school Democrat, that would appeal to enough white folks. He wasn't going to scare them with his progressive or radical views or by being a black woman. And so, on one hand, I don't necessarily like black women being the face of let's keep Joe Biden in the race, but I understand the very pragmatic reasons why black women want to keep Joe Biden in the race.
Well, then I have to ask you, do you think he can pull it off? What do you think?
It doesn't look good. It doesn't look good. I think it's possible. I think it's going to really be a fight to the very end. I think it'll be a close race. But I know that Biden has upset a lot of people with his handling of the situation in Gaza, and there are going to be people who feel they can't hold their nose and cast a vote for him again, that they did it the first time. They won't be doing it again. There are people who do believe that the undoing of this country needs to just happen, that we're running from it, and that basically everything just needs to burn down. And I think a lot of people are willing to let things burn down. I am not one of them. I will be casting a vote for Joe Biden or from whomever is the top of the Democratic ticket, who I expect to be Joe Biden at this point. Inspire enthusiasm. And when we just look at his mental acuity at this point and how he does in interviews, he did an interview with Complex, which is, a hip hop lifestyle website. And it was just so cringeworthy and so uncomfortable. Joe Biden should be on the porch with a blanket in his lap at this point, but instead he's running for the highest office in the land again, and we desperately need him to win. It's a really awful position that we're all in.
Yeah. Well, and I think, a lot of it is that there's kind of this sort of cult of credentials among a lot of Democrats, and like you saw that with Ruth Bader Ginsburg, people were like, no, she's going to live forever. We're going to help her celebrate. She doesn't have to retire. She can keep going. And well, she couldn't. And she died, and Trump got to appoint her replacement. And she should have quit. She should have retired. Joe Biden should have retired after 2022, I think. The elections where the Democrats did well, he could have been like, yeah, all right, see, I did a good job for you guys.
take it away, next generation, you know, hash it out in the primary, do what you want to do. I'll be there for you. But not in the White House or whatever, you know, and, but he didn't do that, you know, and Nancy Pelosi, she clung to power for a long time, but at least she did finally pass the torch over to Hakeem Jeffries, who actually seems to be doing a fantastic job, from what I can see. You know, but like there's this idea, you know, and like in the legal world, in the constitutional law professors, like they built this religion of the judge, this cult of the constitutional judge, and, you know, believing that all judges are impartial and they love precedent, and, you know, they put away their personal opinions in all cases. And then meanwhile, the Federalist Society was, you know, building a giant conveyor belt full of religious nut job judges and shoving them in as much as possible. And nobody paid attention to them in the left-wing legal establishment. And like I found this woman who teaches con law at USC out here. She was like looking at the Roberts Court rulings and all these horrible things they've been doing. And she was like, I just don't understand it anymore. Like, I was making my syllabus for this year and I started crying because nothing makes sense in what I thought was real. And it's like, that's because you had a religion. It wasn't real. You invented this. Like, there's no such thing as judicial objectivity, and you never read a lick of critical theory or legal realism. Like, if you had bothered to look at that stuff, you wouldn't have been so naive. But like, they just keep getting surprised, mugged by reality over and over and over again, and they don't learn anything, it seems like, and nobody gets fired. I don't know. That's my I'm going off on a rant there. But what do you think of that?
No, I think you're correct. You know, like, I think, again, on the left, there's been this idea of civility and assuming the best of people, and that everybody just wants what's right for America. We just may not have the same vision for it, you know, but like, no, these people want to do tremendous harm to our ways of life. You know, they want to oppress and incarcerate people, and they should be taken seriously as a threat that they are, you know, but that's just not how Democrats roll.
Yeah, and maybe, I mean, honestly, maybe some of it is that this is mostly nicely dressed white people who are calling the shots. Is that what it is? Maybe.
It's a big part of it.
So. Yeah. All right. Well, I think let's maybe wrap up. You are working on a book that I want to make sure we give a plug for. Why don't you tell my audience about that?
I am working on a book about single Black motherhood. It does not come out until next year, so you've got plenty of time to get ready for it.
Okay. And we'll do a separate episode about your book when you get ready, get ready to have it on pre-order. But yeah, it's been a great conversation. For people who want to keep up with your stuff, Jamila, what should they do? What's your advice?
You can still find me on Twitter at Jamila Lemieux, and I'm also on Instagram at Jamila Lemieux.
All right. And then, of course, you are also, you've got you're a podcast co-host over on Slate as well. You want to give a plug for that?
Yes, I am a co-host of the parenting podcast, Karen Feeding. We air twice a week. I'm also a contributor to the Karen Feeding Parenting Advice column every Friday on Slate.
All right. Sounds good. I hope people check that out. All right. Well, thanks for being here, and loved having you.
Thank you for having me.